There's an old-fashioned sort of party that people used to host. I haven't ever been to one myself, but it's a sort of party where people come with masks on so that you may be able to see their eyes, but you can't actually tell who it is. And then perhaps when you've got to know somebody at the end of the party, the masks will come off and people will say, "It was you all along and I didn't realise." Of course, it's a fiction, because if you'd known somebody that well, the voice or whatever might have given it away. But you can hold that idea in your minds as you read this story, where the mask is on. Here are people who are faced with some fairly undesirable folk, the riffraff, the unemployed, the people who sleep on the street, the people who have to be sent to prison or whatever, and nice people, respectable people, try not to notice them. Jesus says, wait a minute, I want you to think about this. Maybe this is a party and everyone is wearing a mask, and maybe when the masks have come off, you'll discover that that was me all along. And so the story works its way out, this sheep and goat story, through the idea that when people have ministered to the homeless, the stranger, the naked, the hungry, the prisoner, then maybe they will discover one day that it really was Jesus himself they were ministering to. This is a difficult passage. I've often come and gone as to how precisely to interpret it, because some people think that it's a kind of a universal statement, that as you look out in the world there are these hungry people, these prisoners, etc., and we will all be judged according to this on how we have treated anyone who's in that kind of situation. Other people have said, no, Jesus has said, inasmuch as you've done it to one of the least of these my brothers and sisters, which would then mean that the world will be judged on how they have treated God's people, the church, through the ages. I suspect it may actually be a bit of both. And as Jesus is telling the story, it resonates out in different directions, as with the imagery in apocalyptic writing or in the book of Revelation or something like that. We shouldn't expect everything to be nicely cut and dried. And I think the challenge comes to us particularly today, particularly if we're perhaps reasonably comfortable in our Christian lives, to realise that this is the fourth of the four great ways in which Jesus says he is to be known. We can actually get to know him. The first is prayer, the second is scripture, the third is the sacrament. But the fourth is the service to the poor. If people say, well, Jesus seems remote to me, you can tell them to pray, you can tell them to read the Bible, you can tell them to come and receive the bread and the wine at this wonderful bread-breaking service, the Eucharist, call it what you like. But you can also say, why not join us in ministering to the people of whom Jesus himself said that one day the mask will be off and you'll discover that it was me all along. Now, the church has in many times in history done that superbly. Indeed, often the church was in the forefront. In the very early days when it was still being persecuted, the church was in the forefront of what we would now regard as caring for the poor in the community, looking after people to whom they had no obligation, not just other Christians, not just other family members. That was one of the reasons that the gospel spread so rapidly in the second and third centuries, because people looked at these folk and said, we didn't know it was possible to live like that. Nobody has ever behaved like that in the world before. Wouldn't it be wonderful if, starting with this Lent, your church where you are might be known as the people who other people looked at down the street and said, that's amazing. What are those people up to? We didn't know that sort of thing was possible. And you were able to say, it's because we believe we are ministering to Jesus himself.